Okay. Hello, my name is Jennifer and I'm an electrical engineer at AECOM, and I'll be talking about what I do as an electrical building services engineer. So before I get into what building services engineering is, here's a little bit about my background about getting into engineering. I was always really interested in the construction industry, particularly the architecture. I love looking around in cities and all the amazing buildings around. I loved infrastructure, so all the bridges and big sort of stadiums and shopping centres and things like that. I like knowing how things worked, and that's an integral part of being an engineer. But I realised that I wasn't that artistic as much as I wanted to be, and that in reality, architecture wasn't what I wanted to do. I was better at school at maths and sciences, so I was introduced to engineering at quite a young age, and from there, that was what I wanted to do, so there was no stopping me. So for my A-levels, I chose physics and maths, and I realised I was a good problem solver. Engineering allowed me to have the creativity with the design aspect that I didn't realise you could have if you were focused on maths. So I went to university to look at open days to look at engineering, and eventually sort of fell into building services and ended up doing a degree in architectural engineering, which is a form of building services, which I'll go into a bit more detail exactly what that is. But that's how I started engineering, and from there did an internship and eventually got a master's degree in architectural engineering and landed a graduate position at AECOM. So what is building services engineering? Imagine yourself in some of the big buildings you see around, like museums or even schools. Now imagine them without any lighting, no heating, no ventilation, no plumbing or electricity. You're basically left with a cold, dark space that isn't very nice to be in or even very usable. Everything inside a building which makes it habitable and comfortable comes under building services. Now, building services is generally split into three categories: MEP, or mechanical, electrical, and public health engineering. So when you're working in building services, you have a speciality. So for example, I'm an electrical engineer. So what are each of these? Mechanical engineers are responsible for the design of the thermal comfort, which is heating and cooling systems, so like your central heating, radiators and aircon. They're also responsible for ventilation, which is making sure that your space, so for example your classrooms, have enough fresh air coming into them and circulating air around the building. In the top image, in the top image, you can see there's a large metal looking duct, and that is a large duct from a plant room, which will move large amounts of air through a building. In this case, a 60+ story office block in London. These services are all around the building, but they're usually hidden in the ceilings above, so you don't see them, or installed into cupboards, so they're out of view. Electrical engineers are responsible for the design of the lighting systems, the power to the building, and all the electrical supplies you need, so like your computers, and to plug in and charge your phones. They're also responsible for working with specialist engineering on the fire alarm systems and IT requirements. In the bottom picture, you might be able to see a metal ladder going across the ceiling, and that's called a cable ladder. And they all hold all the cables that travel around the buildings to power the lights, or the large power requirements, such as all the equipment that needs to run some of the mechanical systems I just spoke about. These spaces are often jam-packed with various pipes, ducts and cables running around supplying all the equipment that you see, so radiators, lights, power sockets, etc. Public health engineers are responsible for the water supplies to the building, all the water requirements for the kitchens and bathrooms, and then for the plumbing and drainage systems. Like I said, a large part of why I love my job is that it's a design position. I design the electrical systems throughout the building. I often use the analogy of a maze. Imagine a building is a maze. My job is to make sure you get from point A, which is usually a plant room where all our equipment is, and then I have to make sure that I create a route hitting all the room's requirements along the way, and then end at another point. We work with a lot of other specialist areas, so there are engineers that I work with, as I mentioned, on fire safety. We work with lift engineers to make sure that you can effectively travel in lifts and escalators. We work closely with the sustainability team and acousticians. Building services is a lot more complex than you might originally think. We are often the team that links the structural engineers, the people that make sure the building stands up, with the architect to make sure that the building is as usable as possible. It's all well and good having an amazing looking building, but if nobody wants to use it, then we haven't done a very good job. So what does this actually look like in reality? Building services is, although an important part, is only a small portion of a design team that's full of loads of other professions that work to design, build and operate a building. As you can see on the diagram, we work with architects, other engineers such as structural engineers, contractors who are the builders on site that actually build what we've designed, and many, many more than is just shown here. But to me, that's the most exciting part. So much more goes into designing a building, so that you have to be able to design a system that works for everyone. As part of my day-to-day job, I work with a lot of computer software creating drawings and 3D models of buildings so we can see what design will look like before they're built. I've been lucky enough to work on loads of different projects, including some of the skyscrapers you see around London, as well as projects across the globe, working with different teams in different countries. Occasionally, I will visit site and check what's been installed or conduct surveys to provide the client with the best solution for their project. Another important factor in our job is the climate emergency. Now, I'm sure everyone's heard about the climate in one form or another, but we need to make sure that we are producing the most efficient designs possible that don't negatively impact the climate and design buildings that will last for the next 50 years at least. So as I said, there were so many people involved in a construction project, which is why I like working at AECOM. AECOM is an example of a large construction consultancy, which means we provide a lot of services I've mentioned here already. We work in loads of different sectors, which just shows the vastness of opportunities, both in engineering and in construction. I was lucky when I was at school because I knew what I wanted to do, but I only started to realise that engineering is actually so much wider than you first think. Every part of your daily lives will have some form of engineering involved, from waking up and switching on a light to now doing all of your lessons online. I also thought I'd take this opportunity to answer a few questions I commonly get about my job. Firstly, you don't need to have a degree to do engineering. A lot of companies have apprenticeship schemes, including AECOM, that allow apprentices to learn on the job, so please don't be put off if you don't think university is for you. Secondly, the work that I do is generally with large-scale buildings, so offices, schools, shopping centres, places like that, rather than individual homes. Saying that, we do a lot of work in the residential sector on large blocks of flats, for example. Another point I often get asked about is that mechanical and electrical engineering separately are huge disciplines. So engineers that work in building services are generally more specialised in what we do, similarly to mechanical engineers that work in cars and mechanics, and electrical engineers that can work in robotics. We are just one type or form of many, many different types of engineering. The final question I get, and I do get it quite a lot, is in reality, maths and physics is a small technical part of my daily job. And although knowing the technical aspects of systems is important, it is something you'll learn while working. And in fact, the problem solving and inquisitive and design philosophy, I think, is actually something far more important to have. Okay, so thank you. I hope you've learned a little bit more about building services engineering, and if nothing else, it's given you an opportunity to consider some form of engineering in the future. So thank you.